Is this the episode where Nate's personality changes for good? Did you spot ex-England international footballer Peter Crouch's cameo in this episode? Did some of the storylines in this episode not quite work? We'll be talking about these questions and more in this video. Welcome to Square Eyes, a channel where we recap, review and take a sideways look at your favourite TV shows. This video will be looking at the 7th episode of Season 2 of Ted Lasso, called Headspace. I'll be recapping the main things that happened, giving you my thoughts, picking out my favourite line, talking about any interesting trivia I've found, and looking ahead to the future episodes. Let's jump straight in. The episode opens showing Keeley and Roy's life together, and how Roy is seemingly never more than a few feet away from Keeley. A bit like how you're never more than 2 feet away from a rat in New York City, apparently. Even when she gets to work, Roy spots that she's going to the cafe and asks if he can come with her too. Keeley says of course, but it's pretty clear that she wants a bit of time to herself. Nate goes to visit his parents and he spots himself on the back of the paper his father's reading. He points it out and his dad gives him a mini lecture on humility. It's a shame because Nate clearly just wants a bit of praise from him, but instead gets nothing back. His mother sees that he needs some encouragement and says she's proud of him, but calls him her boy wonder rather than the wonder kid, which annoys him too. Ted comes in for his session with Doctor Sharon and he shows his discomfort with the situation by not even being able to sit in a chair without making it really awkward, as he tries out a series of poses and positions that aren't comfortable for him. Eventually Dr. Sharon tells him he'll be best just to sit in the chair next to her. Ted rambles on, talking rubbish because he's nervous, until Dr. Sharon tells him not to worry, and that seems to put him at ease. Just as it seems he's relaxed enough to open up, he says he doesn't want to do this and walks straight out of the room. On the training pitch, the players make fun of Nate's new status as the Wonder Kid, after he was widely praised in the press after their cup win in the last episode. Nate takes their jokes in good humour until Colin joins in, and then he turns a bit nasty and makes a remark about how he benched him in the game. It gets a laugh from the players, but it looks like Nate is being needlessly mean when he also tells Colin to sit out the next training drill too. Back in the changing room, the players gather around Sam's phone as he tells them the mystery woman he's been communicating with on the banter app hasn't replied for 3 days. Then we find out the reason there hasn't been a reply is that Rebecca is dithering about whether she should send a message suggesting they meet up. Keeley and Higgins think that she should just meet up with him, but she's not so sure because she's worried that it won't work out, or that his favourite film is Ratatouille. Or, well, I think the real reason is that she's just scared to take a risk with someone she feels a genuine connection with. Then they got onto the subject of Keeley and Roy's relationship, and Keeley admits that she wants a bit more space, but she can't even properly start talking about him before he turns up in Rebecca's office. Rebecca and Higgins start jazz scatting to try and cover up the fact that they're talking about Roy, but Keeley just admits to it. I don't know if it's because he has no ego or a huge ego, but Roy seems completely not bothered by the fact that they're talking about him, and he and Keeley head off. Then Rebecca and Higgins go back to their jazz scatting, which is possibly the worst noise I've ever heard. Really depraved, nasty stuff. Considering this is supposed to be a wholesome programme, they really shouldn't be putting that kind of filth in it. At Roy and Keeley's house, Keeley is still feeling that she didn't get any time to herself. She tells Roy to leave her alone and read his book on the sofa, which he does, but she's too attracted to him to concentrate and starts kissing him. If Roy was getting the idea that he was getting on her nerves before this moment, then Keeley's now sending out very mixed signals, so he goes some other way to explain why he isn't picking up on the fact that she wants some more space. The following day, Ted turns up again in Dr. Sharon's office. When she says she's surprised he came back, he says he doesn't quit things, but he doesn't look particularly happy to be in her office. Dr. Sharon asks Ted about whether he's had therapy before, and he tells her a little bit about his experience with the marriage counsellor. Then Ted makes some fairly rude comments about how therapists charge by the hour, but sessions only last 50 minutes, and how he thinks therapy is a load of rubbish. He thinks Dr. Sharon is only doing her job because she gets paid to do it, and she doesn't really care about how he feels or helping him with his problems. Then he storms out of the office again. Sam and Rebecca bump into each other in the corridor because they're both so absorbed in their phone screens. What they don't realise is that they're both busily waiting for the other person to reply to them in the anonymous dating app banter. Regardless, there does seem to be a spark of attraction between the two of them. Colin goes to see Nate in his office to see if there's a problem between them, after Nate had a go at him on the training pitch the day before, despite the fact Danny and Jamie made similar jokes and didn't get picked on. Nate is absorbed at looking up stories of himself online, but pulls himself away with a sigh to tell Colin that the reason he's annoyed with him and not the other two is because they are like painters of fine art, and Colin is like someone who makes art for chain hotels. It's needlessly nasty criticism that doesn't seem to have any purpose beyond being hurtful, which is even worse when you consider Colin's been doing work with Dr. Sharon to build up his self-esteem. Coach Beard overhears the interaction from the adjoining office and is clearly unimpressed with Nate's words. Keeley, Rebecca and Higgins seem to have adapted the boot room into an unofficial smoking room. In Keeley's case, it's mostly to get away from Roy, who is reading his book in her office. Jamie then turns up to try and get his name on his shirt enlarged. Keeley then starts talking about how she's not getting any space from Roy, just as he opens the door. Roy asks if they're talking about him, and they all say yes, to which he just nods, and Keeley leaves with him. Again, he doesn't seem all that bothered. Back at their home, Keeley is trying to watch TV, but Roy is reading his book in a very distracting way. He's enjoying Dan Brown's writing so much that he can't help but commentate and react to what's happening on the page. This leads to Keeley erupting and having a go at him. Roy's completely baffled by her reaction, but then, when he understands what she's saying, he's actually quite hurt. Partly about the fact that she wants more time to herself, but more that she's been talking to everyone at the club about her need for space. He thinks it makes him sound like a needy, clingy fridge magnet, which it kinda does. He storms out of the house to collect his thoughts, leaving Keeley alone, which gives her the space she wanted, but perhaps not the way she wanted to get it. Coach Beard is waiting for Nate when he comes into the office the next day. He tells him that what he said to Colin the day before was out of line, and he needs to make it right. Nate agrees with Beard, but rather than look to put things right, his first question is whether Ted knows about it, which suggests he's more bothered about looking bad in Ted's eyes than actually trying to undo the damage he's done. Ted makes a third attempt at therapy, but Dr. Sharon tells Ted that she was offended by the things that he said about her profession the other day. She points out that Ted gets paid to coach players, but that doesn't mean he doesn't care about them. This lands home with Ted, and he seems slightly embarrassed about the things he said, and he says he's sorry. Dr. Sharon then tells him that she can't be his mentor without occasionally being his tormentor, which points towards how therapy can involve going through some initial pain before it starts to help. Ted seems a lot more at ease in her presence now, and it looks like he's actually ready to start doing the work. On the training pitch, Nate makes an apology to Colin for what he said the day before. The players are all quick to forgive him and surround him with a big group hug. Then they start on some drills, and Roy starts criticising Jamie for not getting close enough to Richard. Jamie sticks up for himself by saying, actually, Richard needed Jamie to give him some space. Jamie knew that if he got too close, it would have crowded Richard, so it was best just to give him some space. Suddenly, the penny drops for Roy, but about his relationship with Keeley rather than the training drill, and he storms off the pitch to go sort things out. In the changing room, the players present Nate with a gift of a shirt with Wonder Kid printed on the back, which is the name he gave himself in the media interview after the win against Spurs in the Cup. It was Will, the new kitman's idea. It seems to have come from a place of real affection and admiration for Nate, and he accepts it with a smile. Trent Crimm tracks Ted down to the Crown and Anchor and asks him for an official answer about his early departure from the Spurs Cup game. We know that Ted really left because he was having a panic attack, but he tells Trent Crimm that it was because of a case of food poisoning. Trent seems happy with Ted's answer, but the concerned look from Ted afterwards suggests that there might be more coming from this story. Keeley gets home to find a bag packed waiting by the door. She fears it's because Roy's leaving her, but it's nothing that dramatic. He's run her a bath with candles, rose petals, and a custom playlist, so she can have a bit of time to herself. The bag by the door is because he's going out for a few hours so she can have time to herself. Nate is checking his name on social media again and keeps scrolling through the positive tweets until he finds something critical, which, because it's social media, he finds eventually. Joe the Man 6 thinks that he's a bit of a loser, and this seems to set something off in Nate. He grabs the Wonder Kid shirt he was given earlier, takes it to Will the Kitman, and tells him if he ever does anything to humiliate him again, he'll make his life a misery. This feels like Nate escalating from someone who's got a bit of a harsh side to actually being a really unpleasant person, as Will wasn't trying to humiliate him and really didn't deserve that kind of treatment from Nate. After a sequence of excellent episodes, this one was my least favourite episode of the season so far. It's still good by the standards I'd judge any other TV show, but it's not a great Ted Lasso episode in my eyes. Maybe I'm being harsh, but I love this series so much I just felt the storylines in this episode didn't hit the same heights as the others. Ted trying to start therapy but repeatedly storming out felt a bit like the kind of thing you would see happen in any sitcom or drama. In fact, it's something we saw regularly in The Sopranos, which Ted references earlier in the episode. Often Ted Lasso does a good job of paying tribute to its influences, but in this case it just felt derivative. I can see the problem the writers had, as Ted wouldn't willingly just submit to therapy with Dr. Sharon because of his past experiences and general distrust of the profession. So this episode where he has to feel her out and test the boundaries was part of the process he needed to go through before he could properly open up to her. But it was still hard work to see Ted, who was usually so kind and fair to people, being unpleasant and mean to Dr. Sharon. I also had some issues with the Roy and Keeley story in this episode, as I'm not sure I really bought that they're the kind of people who would have this sort of problem. Keeley always comes across as a straight talker, so I don't see why she wouldn't just tell Roy straight away she wanted some space. And Roy isn't a delicate flower, so he wouldn't have been upset if Keeley had said she wanted some space. Instead, it was one of those standard sitcom storylines, which only really occur because two characters don't talk to each other, and a conversation would have resolved the whole thing before it even started. The other thing that made this episode less enjoyable to watch was seeing more of Nate slide into becoming something else too. It's been leading this way for a few episodes, but I think the final scene where he threatened Will confirmed he's becoming a bit of a monster. The taste of fame he experienced when he stepped up in the cup game seems to have gone to his head, and he's obsessed with checking his social media presence and what people are saying about him in the media. I think that's because the praise he gets through these channels gives him an increased sense of self-worth. But sadly, that isn't the kind of value that lasts for long, and it's soon deflated even with the mildest of criticisms. And I think that's why I reacted so badly to Colin's joke on the training pitch, and the mean tweet. I think Danny Rojas summed it up best on the training pitch when he described him as a wounded butterfly. He's incredibly fragile, so any criticism stings him so much that he lashes out wildly. My favourite line in this episode came from Jamie Tart, when he came into the boot room to ask, "Do you think you can take my name off my shirt and put it back on, but bigger?" This seems like exactly the kind of idea that Jamie Tart would spend a lot of his free time thinking about, and hoping to come true. While the names on the back of football players' shirts are all in standard sizes, I'm sure a player such as Jamie Tartt thinks that he deserves extra large letters on the back of his shirt. I find it quite interesting that Roy Kent is reading the Da Vinci Code. All the pop culture references in Ted Lasso have a purpose behind them. I think the point here is to tell us that Roy isn't a sophisticated reader. While I've not read it myself, the Da Vinci Code is often sneered at by book snobs, but it's obvious that Roy's loving reading it. I think it shows that books don't have to be great works of literature to entertain people, and Roy clearly isn't bothered about whether Dan Brown won the Booker Prize or not. He's just enjoying racing through the chapters. The last time we saw him enjoying a good read was when Ted gave him a copy of A Wrinkle in Time in Season 1, which was intended to inspire him to become a leader in the team. Perhaps it also sparked a love of reading too. Staying with books, when Coach Beard overhears Nate being horrible to Colin, we get a little glimpse of the book he's reading, which is About a Boy by Nick Hornby. I both read this book and watched the Hugh Grant film adaptation a very long time ago, so my memory's a bit hazy, but it's a story about a man who's drifting through his life until he finds purpose again by taking care of a young boy. This isn't the most obvious Nick Hornby book to have chosen, as he also wrote one called Fever Pitch, which is all about supporting a London-based football club, which could have been more in keeping with Beard's usual sports and performance-based book choices. Ted says that he doesn't quit things to Doctor Sharon in this episode, which is a callback to episode 5 of season 1, where he tells Michelle, his now ex-wife, that he promised himself that he would never quit things. The episode of Sex and the City that Keeley is watching has a very similar plotline to Keeley and Roy's situation in this episode. Carrie is in a relationship with Aidan and feels like she doesn't have enough space. Carrie ends up breaking up with him a few episodes later. Hopefully Keeley and Roy's relationship is built on stronger foundations. Nate is listening to a podcast on his way into the training ground before Coach Beard confronts him in his office. The podcast is being presented by Peter Crouch, who is a former England international and Premier League footballer who now hosts a popular football podcast too. This episode moved ahead a couple of the season's major plot lines, so we've now got to a point where Ted and Dr. Sharon seem to be ready to properly get into therapy and try to address his issues. While seeing a therapist isn't a magic solution, it might give him the bit of help that he needs to keep his anxiety in check and to take on the issues he seems to be bottling up. I don't know if we're watching Nate's personality changing over the course of this season, or his true nature is just slowly being revealed to us, but one way or another we're continuing to see a nasty streak come out in him. He's behaved like a bully towards Colin and Will in this episode. Maybe the small taste of fame his experience has gone to his head, or perhaps he's always been like this and he's just covered it up better in the past. It seems like Coach Beard is aware of the issue, but Ted seems too caught up in his own problems to have noticed it developing. On a more positive note, Rebecca and Sam's mystery romance remained a mystery to them in this episode, but we did see the scene where they bumped into each other while holding their phones. If either had looked at the other person's phone, they would have known straight away, but they didn't, so we'll have to wait for at least one more episode before they find out. It seems that Rebecca was afraid to make the leap and commit to meeting the person she'd been talking to online for so long, possibly because she's afraid to make herself vulnerable, despite the things she said when she broke it off with John at the start of the season. As for Roy and Keeley's relationship, I think the difficulties that we saw in this episode were the kind of thing that most couples go through. Keeley didn't deal with it particularly well, and Roy was a bit slow to pick up on her signals that she wanted more space, but it all ended up fine in the end. If anything, they seem closer together by the end of the episode, and their relationship is still going strong. Thank you for watching my recap and review of episode 7 of season 2 of Ted Lasso. I'll be back with a video for episode 8 in a couple of days. Please subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. Goodbye.